One thing I see over and over again with one-on-one clients is that they think that they're working on relationship skills for the sake of dating. And what they actually find when we go in and apply some of these resources and ways of thinking is that the relationships in all of their lives start to improve, specifically in their family dynamics and at work. And while I don't think that every framework fits every context and sometimes can make it more challenging to navigate, I do want to give some context around how what we're teaching fits in different scenarios, specifically the workplace. And I don't intend for this to seem like an HR video, but I do want to talk about the energetics of what's happening so you have the awareness needed to maintain creative and pleasant interactions with your coworkers. Because as someone with depth, what I've noticed is that you are really great at sensing through things, finding that deeper level of nuance in the complexity, and really desire to create a safe environment for the people around you. And that doesn't just turn off because you're in a professional setting. And so understanding how the energetic dynamics are playing out is going to allow you to navigate those dynamics more smoothly. If you're new to my work, my name's Courtney Shand. I love helping men with depth really step into and lead from that place, whether it be in the dating space or in their career. I find that a lot of the principles apply in many domains, and this is no different. But I want to zoom in specifically on a dynamic today that I had someone in the comments share about, because I don't hear this distinction made a lot of times. And while I'm not going to teach you how to be a professional in the workplace, I do want to offer the distinctions that have made the biggest impact with the people who I'm working with on an individual basis. Because once you understand your energetic impact, the energy that's trying to be expressed in that scenario, and how to actually receive it in a way that feels good for everyone, the dynamics that you may have been dreading at work tend to resolve on their own. Because I had someone in the comments ask specifically about a workplace scenario, and I think it's probably a really common scenario where you're engaging with the same people on a daily basis, and a lot of times in a context where you want to maintain the safety and functionality of those relationships. Whether it's a creative project that you're working on together or just the vibe of the workplace, obviously making sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable requires a level of emotional maturity and personal responsibility. So I'm just going to assume that that's where you're coming from, is that you're wanting to take more responsibility for your part in things. And that's where I think having more awareness leads to more agency. Because one of the dynamics that I'm seeing on repeat that's really tricky to navigate is the one that doesn't necessarily feel platonic, but it's clearly not romantic. For example, the colleague that you're working on the project with. Contextually, it's not romantic. You understand that on a cognitive level, and yet as a deep person, you are likely feeling under the surface of things, and there's a feeling that you can't quite put your finger on, and therefore you can't quite navigate either. And this is what we call sensual energy. It's the energy of depth, and if it's extended in a romantic context, it is going to create the foundation for emotional intimacy and even sexual expression. But in other contexts where you're not wanting the relationship to go in that direction, it can be tricky to navigate if you can only distinguish platonic and sexual energy. So I want to give some extra language to this because this is the energy that's trying to be expressed. And what I've found is that when you have some language to describe your experience, it's easier for your mind to orient where you are and where you're wanting to go and the best route to get there. I think this one's especially tricky because any type of creative project does require a little bit of vulnerability. And I wouldn't necessarily call it emotional vulnerability, but it does require you to let your guard down a little bit and to let some of those ideas come through. And in those instances, you may not have particular boundaries set up to navigate them. The workplace is actually a unique space because it has a common focus, which creates a natural boundary of sorts. A way of behaving that is appropriate and not appropriate in this gray space. I want you to think about a mentor or a teacher or a coach that you've had. Someone that when you were around them, you found that you ended up leaving their presence feeling good about yourself, not just from a space of being hyped up, but from a place where they really saw you and valued your contribution. And they had a sense of clarity around them in that as you left their presence, you left feeling more clear and able to take action on things. Not because they gave you the answer or because they told you what to do, but because they allowed there to be a space where you were able to reach your own conclusions and they were present with you while you were finding that level of clarity. That creates an experience internally as humans that we want to reciprocate something. And I find that we just don't have great language for what that reciprocation is. We call it appreciation or even professional admiration or respect. But when you tune into the experience that you have after you are with someone like that, notice what you want to do with that energy. Most people want to do something in return, repay a favor, say something nice or appreciative to that person, because it feels really good to both be acknowledged by them and also have your appreciation received. Where this tends to get a little sticky for most people is the way that they're particularly bracing. When we don't have language for the experience that you have of sensual energy, that feeling that you just had with the mentor of being seen, appreciated, having your gifts encouraged, it's likely for that energy to build in two directions. The first is going to create an experience of activation that's looking to be grounded. I talk a lot on this channel about limerence, and that experience of being activated and looking to have that activation maintained is one that is really common to limerence. And when you're not able to create that experience on your own, it can create a feeling of obsessiveness or need for that person. And that can be a common side effect for people, leading them to behaviors that aren't necessarily appropriate for the workplace. Or it can cause people to brace, either in their giving of the appreciation or in how the other person is receiving their appreciation. When that experience is misread and is braced against, it can cause a lot of misunderstanding that can be awkward and painful to navigate, where now you may be reading into someone's intentions and what they may be thinking about and trying to read between the lines. And that can be not only exhausting, but also have you spending a lot of time trying to solve the wrong problem. What I found works better is to actually understand your energetic impact, because as a deep person, it's really likely that you are the teacher, mentor, coach in this scenario, where you may not even be aware, where people come into your presence and your space and new insights open up to them. They are able to see things more clearly. You're able to stay with them in the complexity and stretch it out until they get the clarity that they're needing to take action on. And this is just part of who you are, not something that you really have to think too much about. And when you don't realize that this is how you naturally are and the impact that it has on people, you may be either brushing off their efforts to appreciate you in return or never going back to a state of neutral. You might be building too much sensual tension or intensity. And people around you may be trying to navigate that level of intensity that feels really natural for you, but is something that they come into your presence and get and then leave. And the way that you interpret how they're engaging with you is often informing how you engage with them. I've had several clients who were really exceptional problem solvers, and without even being aware of it, the people in their environment naturally gained a level of clarity just by being around them. It wasn't until they started practicing creating the sensory space that we teach in Grounded, and I did a whole video on it, I'll put it up here, that they had the contrast to realize that the way they were engaging with their colleagues felt not only more natural, but also more creative. They stopped trying to think their way into appropriateness and started feeling what was contextually appropriate. And because they were more viscerally present, they also started noticing this experience of aliveness that often shows up in the workplace and can sometimes be misconstrued with sexual energy. Because the closer reality is when you operate mostly from your head and you experience a visceral feeling, probably because the workplace is set up to create that safety. You're not having intimate conversations with people on a regular basis. You're not necessarily confronted with the emotional intimacy that would occur in a romantic relationship. And without that sense of threat, a lot of times that visceral aliveness comes online without you having to think about it, which is part of what makes you passionate about what you do, but it can create a murkiness if you assume that it means that it's sexual energy. And it can cause you to read into and misinterpret interactions in a way that you wouldn't necessarily if you felt grounded and had full clarity, which is why I talk so much about the nervous system, because being able to ground that activation allows you to see ways that you want to bring that visceral aliveness to other areas of your life, to pour that into existing relationships that you have, to notice what about this context allows you to come alive in that way, and what would be required for you to show up as that version of yourself in any other context. Because limerence can be tricky to navigate, and the same way that we would resolve for it in a romantic context, and I'll put some videos in the description below if you want to go deeper into that, when it shows up in the workplace, it can be incredibly distracting and uncomfortable, and have you either be self-conscious or steering you into inappropriate interactions. So What I found actually moves the needle is to have a space to return to. That sensory space that I mentioned earlier is what allows you to show up more fully in the workplace, allowing your body to pick up on visceral data, which not only gives you the correct information on how to engage with your coworkers, but actually makes your analytical mind even more effective. Because instead of trying to think your way through every problem, you actually have a wider lens to work with. You can see more information points, make new connections, and engage the people around you in a new way. And this is actually why having some language around sensual energy is so important, especially for analytical men. Because you're generating so much clarity for the people around you, it's naturally creating, with or without your conscious awareness, a dynamic where they're wanting to reciprocate in some way. And if you aren't aware that that's what's happening under the surface, you'll be feeling things happening for other people that you can't quite put your finger on. You may interpret it as sexual energy, or you may be bracing against it altogether because you can't quite identify what it is. When the reality is, when you understand how that dynamic works, you can modulate how much of that energy you are putting into the system, if you will, or you can start to receive the ways that they are wanting to engage from the lens of appreciation or respect. You can put it in a common language that does feel appropriate for the workplace so that you can receive their efforts in return. Obviously, this requires a level of personal responsibility and knowing your own limits of how you want to engage. But what I've noticed with highly analytical men is that there's often an unconscious bracing, and it's keeping them from being aware of what they are contributing to the dynamic in really positive ways, as well as what people are trying to contribute back to them, because it may not look the way that you anticipate, which is why I'm wanting to bring your awareness to it and give it some language so that you can start to see the way that people are wanting to engage with you in return and find ways that feel like they line up with your boundaries, what you're comfortable with receiving, so that you can start experiencing it as appreciation and respect and let it fill up your tank in a healthy, reciprocal way. This concept of sensual energy is not one that I hear talked about anywhere else. My partner Andrew Bauer and I co-facilitate an advanced group designed to help you expand your nervous system to hold this level of energy, because the more skillful you become at holding this type of energy, the more masterful you feel in navigating lots of scenarios, whether it be navigating emotional safety to create things in the workplace or building emotional intimacy that does lead to a romantic context. The more clear you become in how to navigate these situations, you actually create clarity for those around you as well. If you want to get deeper into this, we designed Grounded and the Advanced Sensual Energy Mastery group, which are what we teach our one-on-one clients, but in a group format, and we would love to have you there. We're starting another round of Grounded soon, which focuses on creating that sensory energy space to come back to neutral and allow people to engage with you in a warm, friendly way. We get really great results from that, and it is the prerequisite to this advanced work, so that's the place to start if this has been resonating for you. If you have questions about which would be the best fit for you, feel free to set up a discovery call. I'm going to put all the information that you need in the description below. And if you liked this video, I think you're also going to like this one.